In February 2024, after nearly a decade, Rocksteady released Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And it was an unmitigated disaster that put Warner Bros. Games on the brink. But you see, the game was never about killing the Justice League. Oh, no. It was something else. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the entire story of the beginning of Rocksteady, how the Arkhamverse was created, the development hell behind Suicide Squad, and how Rocksteady killed the Arkhamverse. And spoiler alert, in the end, the Arkhamverse dies. Hit the cool music, brother! A lot of what I'm about to tell you will now make a lot of sense. It will seem like blunt narration of events and rather a history lesson. It will only make sense when you view the parallels of what came after in the development of Suicide Squad. The thing is, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only do that looking back. You see, back when Rocksteady was created in December 2004, it had a philosophy, a principle that were core to their game designs and a focus on single-player games. A couple of employees from Argonaut Games, led by Jamie Walker and Sefton Hill, founded it, having had a plethora of experience from the studio that worked on Harry Potter, Bionicle, and even the forgotten superhero game like Catwoman. And these guys were also avid gamers, having deep passion for classics as The Legend of Zelda and Metroid. Their ambition was simple, creating video game experiences they are passionate about. And with the aid and publishing of Eidos Interactive owning roughly a quarter of their share, they released their first project and IP, Urban Chaos, an experimental first-person shooter that didn't garner much success, but was still the building block for Rocksteady's journey, a relatively small adventure that used the Havoc game engine for the PS2 and Xbox and the turning doors moment for the console generations. But that was merely the first endeavor. Rocksteady then moved on to experimenting and creating high-level prototypes with Unreal Engine 3 for the PS3 and Xbox 360. During the late 2000s, this innovation and technology completely redefined the industry. Games like Mass Effect, Medal of Honor, Mortal Kombat, and Gears of War used a game engine to manifest worlds previously not possible. And it was just the dawn of 7th Gen's hardware, so Rocksteady kept building prototypes with the tech until they landed upon an inspiration for the next project. Their design philosophy dictated only making games they had a deep interest in and weren't going to rush to another game. But on the other side of the story, Eidos Interactive, their partner publisher, landed the full license for a Batman video game in 2007. They were monitoring the experiments done by Rocksteady, and after checking the prototype developed on Unreal Engine 3, Eidos were so impressed that they themselves approached the studio. In the words of studio founder Sefton Hill, "They came to us because they liked the prototype we were working on. They felt that it looked and played great, and asked if we could bring some of that attention to detail to Batman. They basically approached us and said, 'Well, what would you do with Batman?'" From all the studios owned or revered by Eidos, it was the infant Rocksteady that were chosen due to their brilliant and creative work on a generic prototype. There was one key detail though. The publisher granted them complete freedom to use and reinvent the Batman license however they wanted, no strings attached. This part was very, very crucial. The people at Rocksteady were quite excited to work on a superhero they dearly loved. The studio then created a pitch for their version of Batman, which Eidos really liked, but more importantly, it caught the attention of Warner Bros., the company that lent Eidos the license in the first place. Here's a very interesting backstory. Warner Bros. Had a turbulent sale with the 2005 Batman Begins and the canceled Dark Knight tie-in games. They were struggling to utilize the Batman gaming license, and hence were desperate, willing to give anyone the rights to develop their own title. After all, the superhero genre itself wasn't a space studios wanted to work on. So Eidos, having a previous deal with Warner Bros., took the license and granted Rocksteady the freedom to realize their vision. Rocksteady was dealt with all the cards they wanted. A new experimental project, a character they really loved, and most importantly, the freedom of creativity. And as the development switched to Gear 1, they brought in people who were thrilled to work on Batman. Two Pauls, one very familiar and one not so familiar, graced the writing scene to create the world we now know as the Arkhamverse. The first is the not so famous Paul Crocker, lead narrative designer who was a former comic book store employee, dubs himself as the team's nerd guy. Straight away, I was able to talk to them like, we can do this issue of Detective Comics, or you remember this scene in The Killing Joke? We could do it like that. Then there's the renowned Paul Dini, the man recommended by Warner Bros. Themselves. Quite a household name, but for those not familiar, he is a writer that advanced the modern Batman mythology, including comic books Batman Streets of Gotham, animated series Batman the Brave and Bold, and the creator and producer of Batman Beyond. We also got the return of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill to voice act as the Caped Crusader and Joker. With two studio founders, two writer nerds, two legendary voice actors, and countless other talented developers at the helm, we were at the dawn of Arkham. If you pay attention closely, all of them, including Rocksteady, share a pattern. They were all versed and passionate for what was about to be created. The entire process epitomized Rocksteady's philosophy of game design. First, work on a project they actually loved and have expertise in. And second, create an experience that's fun and rooted in the source material. The first box was ticked from the start. The development team was led by the founders Walker and Hill, and numerous other devs who were thrilled to work on it. And more importantly, they had the specialty of working on single-player games from their previous studio. But above everything, they themselves were single-player fanatics who loved to actually play those type of games. The Batman Arkham series was designed meticulously with an open gameplay loop that allows multiple approaches. Stealth missions have numerous ways and combinations to take down enemies with the aid of your environment, gadgets, and playstyles. These mechanics and philosophy took inspiration from the Zelda and Metroid games. Like the rest of the design world, I'm a big fan of Zelda and Metroid. They were definitely big influences. I like that sort of approach to design, giving you a number of different gadgets and abilities that you can use and combine in different ways. It's a direct inspiration from the Zelda games. Although the external inspirations are great, the Arkham world also needed inspirations from the origins of Batman himself. To make this possible, the second design philosophy also had to be met. The development team went back to the roots of Batman and tapped into the character. That's where they unearthed the forgotten identity of Batman as a detective, which was skewed by modern perception. Rocksteady was the first to incorporate detective-level gameplay and lore as a studio, and that expanded upon the experience. One of the things about Batman is that he has so many sides to his character. Sometimes it's perhaps easier to focus on some of those facets and miss out on some of the other things that really make him who he is. If you focus on the brawling element, then you miss out on some of the detective element, or some of the other sides of his character. The dev team architected the core experience of gameplay, but they needed a world and story to manifest it. Now came the lore. With the writing of the two Pauls, the Arkham world was crafted to house Rocksteady's vision. They were given an open license to create their own lore of Batman without any strings. The Pauls took a very loose surface-level idea from Arkham Asylum, a series house on Sirius Earth. They took the initial setting idea from the comic book and wrote a story where Batman was housed in the concentration of his most deadliest foes for one night in Arkham Asylum. It is the holding place for many of Batman's worst and most deadliest enemies, and it presented the challenge of putting Batman into a box. All these elements of development and lore sync it perfectly. We got a dark, gritty interpretation of Batman in a truly generational video game. Enough has been said about Batman Arkham Asylum. To summarize it all, it once held the Guinness World Record for the most critically acclaimed superhero game ever. After receiving more than 45 nominations across major awards and winning 18 of them, it's safe to assume Rocksteady cracked the ice for the superhero genre. But this was far from the end on their front. Although Arkham Asylum was a great experience, it wasn't the definitive one they were envisioning. There were numerous experimental and thrilling concepts that didn't make it into Arkham Asylum. First, Paul Crocker and Dini wanted to limit the first game's story to the asylum, but all of them wanted to explore a game beyond its confinement. And second, there were gameplay ideas of incorporating transversals and vehicles in a fully open world. Building the first game from scratch in just 2 years limited their time and ability to push the threshold of the Unreal Engine and 7th gen hardware. But the foundation was now laid. Rocksteady wanted to build the ultimate Batman experience that would culminate in a fully open-world Gotham City. With that vision in mind, the studio had already decided to pursue sequels before Arkham Asylum was even released. But after the unprecedented release, with 2 million copies sold in just 3 weeks, the future of the studio was bound to change. Rocksteady was fully on the map of Warner Bros. And with Square Enix acquiring Eidos Interactive in 2009, the road was paved for Warner Bros. To take the prodigal studio for themselves. In February 2010, they acquired an undisclosed majority stake of Rocksteady and took the publishing rights of Batman from Eidos. The studio was now part of Warner Bros. Games. This didn't seem like a warning sign back then, though. Rocksteady wanted a sequel, Warner Bros. Really loved that idea, so everything seemed fine. At least for now. But on Rocksteady's front, the ambition was to continue the experience that began 2 years ago. That's the epitome of their design philosophy, experimenting until the threshold. With their grip on the Unreal Engine 3 now firm, they explored some of the mechanics they were keen to expand upon, like the gliding and zipping transversals in an open-world prison, 5 times that of Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, while the two Pauls wrapped up their work on the story of Batman and Joker. Again, upon launch, Arkham City elevated the heights of the franchise even more, getting even higher reception and succeeding tremendously on every metric. But Arkham City represented the beginning of the end. For the writer Pauls, this was their last project, having left after completing the base game. They weren't contacted to return for the DLCs, nor for the third and final entry for an undisclosed reason. Rocksteady also decided the next game would be the concluding chapter for the Batman Arkham franchise.
We've been working on it for, I guess, probably 8 years now, and it's a long time to work on it, and we kind of feel like, you know, this is the natural end for the story. It feels like this is a good place to do it. You know, we really want to kind of go out in style and do something really special, and it feels like this is the way to do it.
Sefton Hill with 2 others took on the writing for Arkham Knight. With this being the last entry, the studio was going all in to make the definitive Batman experience by building a fully open-world Gotham City with a playable Batmobile. But creating those elements required a leap in hardware to 8th gen consoles with a hefty 4 years time gap between Arkham City and Knight. So Warner Bros. Decided to utilize this period by giving an Arkham project to WB Montreal, a new gaming division that was working as a support studio for Rocksteady. Esteemed DC writer Jeff Jones was brought in for input for the development of the new story. With this new golden ticket, the studio decided to create a prequel adventure, Arkham Origins. But upon release, it was rather disappointing for its buggy launch and lack of innovation. It became underwhelming for Warner Bros., although it was a mere prequel to keep fans occupied until Arkham Knight. But this would end up having far more lasting implications than anyone would think. We'll get to that. But in 2015, after moving to 8th gen consoles, Rocksteady were finally able to build a fully open-world Gotham City in the definitive work of Arkham. This was the ultimate Batman experience the studio had been crafting for nearly a decade, the closing chapter for both the story and world. The game was successful, although it wasn't the most highly received, with it being considered the weakest of the Arkham trilogy, especially in terms of the writing. But it was a natural time to close the door on Batman. Rocksteady had experimented, formulated, and developed the peak superhero experience. And now, by staying true to their philosophy, it was time to move on. The writer Pauls had moved on. Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker were also moving on with their team. The Arkham story was complete. Or so we thought. Warner Bros. Had other plans. After the unprecedented thrill ride with Batman Arkham, Rocksteady were keen for a new adventure, wanting to experiment and see where the wind takes them. They wanted to do something different. So Sefton and Jamie started to lead a new project under the codename of Stones, a multiplayer puzzle-solving game that was being prototyped. But in December 2016, the head of video games for Warner Bros., David Haddad, made a surprise visit to Sefton and Jamie. This was to inform them of a change of plans, and more importantly, a change of project. To their surprise, it caught them off guard. This little twist was catalyzed by a recent unraveling a few months back. This is what happened. In August 2016, Warner Bros. Released one of their riskiest yet daring comic book movies of its now canned DCEU, Suicide Squad. A relatively new entry for an industry that wasn't familiar with a team of anti-heroes and C-tier villains. Although there was nothing special nor interesting to write about the movie, it was an unprecedented hit. It grossed a whopping $750 million in the box office, a stunning victory for the executives at Warner Bros., who were profound and eager for more. Impatient to build on this momentum, the company wanted to capitalize and release a new Suicide Squad video game. But in truth, this wasn't a new idea. In fact, a Suicide Squad game was in the works since July 2010, when comic book writer Jeff Jones, remember him? The man brought for Arkham Origins, announced there were plans to develop a vital video game for the IP. 2 years later, he followed it with an update that the game was still in plans but needed the right studio. But just a year later, that studio would be discovered. WB Montreal. Yes, the studio behind the abandoned son that is Batman Arkham Origins. After the disappointing release, Warner Bros. Had entrusted them with the Suicide Squad project. And after all, it wasn't much of a gamble, given mainstream media hadn't discovered the IP yet. And for 3 years, it was in development, until Suicide Squad, the movie, released. And now the stakes changed. Warner Bros. Gave WB Montreal the project because it was a relatively low endeavor with not much appeal. But after the film's success, they realized the potential at hand. So it was time to make a progress check. But to the disappointment of the company, the game's development wasn't smooth. The project was pretty much years away from release and struggling to get the concept right. Growing ever impatient, had to pull the plug from WB Montreal, because this wasn't a B-tier game anymore. It was time to summon the A-listers again. Hence, in December 2016, enter Rocksteady. Project Stones was out, Suicide Squad was in. The time for Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker to return to Arkham, but in a different way. The developers at the studio were initially shocked when they found out about the change of plans. Wanting to try something new after 9 years, they were hesitant on going back to Arkham, but Sefton Hill pleaded that it was in fact a good venture. There would be no need to develop an entire thing from scratch, and the code for Arkham was already there on the Unreal Engine. Also, this type of genre was within the framework of Rocksteady. The daring studio had once defined the superhero world in gaming, and now ready again to redefine it with a twist of ragtag villains. Rocksteady was ready. But there was a catch for Warner Bros. It had to be a live service game. You see, again, this was in 2016, the time where League of Legends and Destiny shook the realms of gaming and spearheaded the rise of games as a service, where revenue generation was no longer tied to a game's launch, but every single day after, for weeks, months, and years, the new meta, the new genre, was discovered and Warner Bros. Had to ride this new wave of gold rush. So it was settled. The executives wanted Rocksteady to develop a Suicide Squad game with live service content. But this was a shock to the studio. They had specialized on the single-player experience as what they came here to do. A multiplayer live service game was out of their reach. So what was Warner Bros.' reply to Rocksteady? You'll figure it out down the line, hopefully. Suddenly, the romance had taken a shift. But there wasn't time to complain. The big bosses had spoken, time to get moving. But right from the starting line, it was development hell. Leaderships and ideas started to clash. The initial vision for the game was to be heavily melee-oriented, with gunplay serving on the side, just like Batman Arkham. But this was a live service game we're talking about. Beat-em-ups can't keep audiences engaged for hundreds and thousands of hours. Their learning curves are short, easy to learn and master. Although fun for solo experiences, they aren't meant for this model. So the game had to shift to prioritizing and centering around gunplay. But that caused even more issues among the devs. First, it became less fun. But priority here is on the quantity of content rather than quality, even if it's at the cost of core gameplay. And second, this being a live service game, all 4 characters needed to be at an equilibrium, as not to penalize players for preferring to main one. Hence, each character had to have an equivalent arsenal with guns and melee combat. But the problem is, it's not authentic to these characters. People don't want to play as King Shark to spray enemies with machine guns, or as Captain Boomerang to focus on shooting at range. One of them is a literal tank, and the other is an agile combatant that utilizes Boomerang meticulously. But in spite of it causing a clash among the devs, and not being authentic to the world, it had to proceed as not to unbalance the characters. And not even that deep into the project, Rocksteady were breaking their development philosophies. First, they were developing a game not many wanted to pursue, with the team being keen for a new adventure. But here they were back at Arkham. Second, it was a live service game very well out of their specialty, and yet they were doing it. And third, they weren't staying true to these characters and world. Authenticity was thrown out of the window. All the principles that made Batman such a success were now being massacred. Their philosophies were being shredded. But it was about to get even worse. The project itself became a dumpster fire to handle. After all, live service and single-player games have much varying scopes and play. Their previous Arkham team had a modest 160 people by 2015, well enough to support the game. But the new project was way beyond their numbers. So Rocksteady rushed to hire new employees to stretch their development muscles. In the project cycle, the studio grew to over 250 people. But to the surprise of those hired, they found out that they would be working on a live service game after they became employed. This was a very secretive project, hence job description was very tightly sealed during development. And some even went to the executives to express their disappointment, saying they were expecting to work on a single-player project, like Rocksteady always do. But instead, they were being rallied to the hype train of a multiplayer. Again, there was not much of a reply. The plan had changed a while back, and it was time to get moving. Nearly 3 years of messy development later, in 2020, an announcement trailer was launched for the game, with the title Kill the Justice League. Of course, fan hype was through the roof. This was the return of Rocksteady after half a decade. But behind the scenes, it was hell. The devs struggling to glue even the basic concepts together. None of the people there knew how to develop a live service game, and even the employees admitted that they didn't spend much time playing games like Destiny. I don't blame them. These guys were single-player fanatics who loved games like Zelda and Metroid. That's how they built the Batman video games. This isn't their specialty. But they somehow needed to get a game out of their scope ready by 2022, with less than 2 years of work time remaining. But the havoc continued. Ironically, Sefton Hill's initial promise that working on something whose foundation was already built being easier turned out being wrong. The single-player code for Batman Arkham became a liability that held them from revitalizing and inventing mechanics suited for a live service game. The devs there knew Suicide Squad wasn't fun to play, so to alleviate, they kept throwing ideas into the mix. Sefton Hill, once again at the eye of the storm, was going through ideas, mechanics, and scripts sent from the team, but kept nerfing, erasing, and changing them, again and again. Nothing was working. At one point, Sefton Hill proposed incorporation of a vehicle gameplay that would allow the players to mount on them and navigate the streets or even use heavy artillery attached to them. The idea was tested and prototyped for months before it was ultimately scrapped. Why? The team realized those vehicles were redundant as all 4 characters were equipped with air transversal tech. So why would any player use those vehicles when they can just soar in the sky? Well, one solution could have been to tone down those jetpacks they kept flying in, or even add difficult enemies that required guns from those vehicles. But you all know what happened. It didn't see the daylight. Everything kept taking the wrong turn, with multiple delays needed as well. There were 3 major pushbacks after the first announcement. But through it all, Suicide Squad was being a live service game that wasn't actually one. You could see the identity clashes and confusion through the gameplay. Rocksteady was known for their cinematic boss battles, to be experienced once, before moving on. But live services are designed for their boss battles to be played numerous times with increasing levels of difficulty. But even the title of the game shows that the Justice League had to die. So who would these players grind for years after that? Well, they ended up creating a seasonal content map with new reskinned bosses and playable characters. But are they fun to play? And would the audience even care about any of these additions? In hindsight, we got the answer. But even in this chaos, Warner Bros. Weren't gonna give up on a potential golden goose, insisting Suicide Squad would be a billion-dollar franchise. And in spite of seeing live service games like Marvel's Avengers and Anthem bomb all in front of them, the executives weren't going to relent. The upper management kept promising the devs that everything would just work out and coalesce at the last minute, like all of Rocksteady's games do. But that was never how their games released. All 3 mainline Arkham games had a plan during development, and when things weren't looking promising, they shifted ideas for future titles and limited their scopes. But Suicide Squad was a free-for-all Scrabble. Yet again, the executives kept sending flattering reviews when giving demonstrations of the game, lauding the high-end graphics and fun gameplay. But even the dev team knew they were out of their depth. Worries kept creeping up, criticism among them severe. So upper management outright banned criticism of any kind during development. The co-founders of the studio were left disappointed and regretted undertaking the project. It had spiraled out of control and into something they never envisioned at the start. Whatever the result was going to be, they weren't going to stick around to find out. Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker left the studio in fall 2022. Longtime employees Nathan Barlow and Darius Agadian were promoted in their wake. A few months after the studio founders left, in February 2023, the first deep dive footage of gameplay was revealed. Heavy focus on gunplay, fine transversals, and live service elements immediately planted doubts in gamers. Critics were unimpressed as well. After a delay was announced in the wake of criticism, some speculated Rocksteady could pivot away from the live service route. But it was too late. There was never saving this sinking ship. A year after the gameplay reveal, Suicide Squad was released, and it killed everyone with it. David Haddad called for an immediate meeting in February 2024 at the London offices of Rocksteady. On most occasions, these meetings are rather tactful and political. But this time, Haddad was blunt and fuming. Suicide Squad had bombed. Warner Bros. Were already taking a $200 million loss, and there was a promise to keep supporting the game for at least 2 years. In other words, it was about to get even worse. In an earnings call in May, Warner Bros. Published heavy losses and market share falls, and from their gaming division, Suicide Squad was responsible for their biggest revenue loss. But when looking at this failure, one issue starts to take central stage. Forbes writer Paul Tassi raised the definitive question to all this debacle. How do you sell a game no one wanted you to make? Rocksteady made a video game they wanted you to want, not what you actually want. Suicide Squad had the writings on the wall before launch. A gameplay and live service model that never aligned with Rocksteady's mantra was always doomed. Though look, It would be unfair to say Rocksteady didn't deliver any promises. There were flashes of brilliance. Possibly that's the saddest beat about this wreckage, the fact that you could see the few seeds of genuity in the messy disaster. Somewhere in the convoluted mess, there was a story and gameplay that was yearning to be unleashed, but only to be clouded by the service model that killed the hundreds before it. What should have been a story-driven melee action adventure was dragged to the abyss by a gun-based combat with gliding mechanics and gear-based system, ill-suited for the Arkhamverse. A repetitive mission design and drive towards level and gear grinding ultimately undermines the game's strongest quality: the story. Spoilers ahead, so please be wary after this point. The base concept of killing the Justice League was a novel idea. Imagine a game where a group of C-tier villains try to take down literal gods. Anyone's first thought was, what creative ways will they use to take out the Flash? Or the methods they'll invent to handle Green Lantern? How will they even survive against Superman? But instead, it all played out in the most boring way possible, spraying them with guns until they were dead. Two of them even played out identically. And even more painfully, it culminated with a disrespectful sentiment to the Batman they themselves had created 2 decades ago. It's hard to see your heroes being torn down without disgracing everything they stood for.
I am vengeance. I am vengeance. I am...
Hey! You had a good run, Brucey. Flying around Gotham, punching bad guys, clean up the streets, causing long-term mental and emotional damage to everyone you knew. It's our turn now. Bet you didn't think it'd be me at the end, huh, Bat?
Perhaps all those who understood who Batman was had all left by then.
It was all a lie. There's nothing wrong with you.
Nice of you to say, but you of all people should know there's plenty wrong with me.
Oh, is it too much? Making new friends after a move is always tough.
Back to the kind of more vaudeville roots of Joker, he's masking insecurities with traditional Joker behavior, but deep down he's not sure who he is.
Season 2 of Suicide Squad came with the revelation that the Justice League weren't dead, rather the base game killed off their clones. And now it's about saving the Justice League. And while that might mitigate some of the damage, the writing's on the wall for Suicide Squad. There's no avoiding this train wreck, and there's no saving it. While this disaster unraveled for Warner Bros., Rocksteady's identity was diminished to ashes, and with it, the Arkhamverse was torn down. The sad reality is, the Arkham world was never meant to be this billion-dollar franchise Warner Bros. Envisioned. It was merely a world a bunch of Batman nerds created to give fans an experience. But even then, it had a lot of potential stories and games that fans would have loved to play. The Arkhamverse could have still had more to be explored. But money was a priority for Warner Bros., even at the cost of legacy. Of course, the Arkhamverse isn't dead, but in truth, it's the people that make up studios, stories, and experiences. Arkham was made by those people. But they've already left, and with that, Arkham is gone, along with Rocksteady. Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker left to establish a new studio, along with other devs from Rocksteady. A new place where they'd be free from executive pressure and do what they actually want. Huh. Kind of funny how it all looped back to the beginning of Rocksteady. But whatever remains now is merely fragments and bits of legacy left behind. So, let's be honest. Rocksteady is dead. Suicide Squad is dead. And more painfully, the Arkhamverse is dead. And Rocksteady killed it.